Imagine a world where beauty is a curse, and favor from power is only the beginning of your nightmare. A place where a single glance from a sultan can decide if your life ends in pleasure or unimaginable horror. You are about to descend into a story erased from history, a secret hidden in silk corridors and shadowed chambers. Welcome to the Ottoman Palace, where discarded concubines were not sent away, they were broken. Their fates hidden, their screams buried beneath centuries of secrecy. What you are about to witness is real. Names erased, faces forgotten, but the terror, it lingers, still echoing in the walls that once swallowed them whole. Before we step further into the darkness, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city below. Let the world know you dared to witness this forbidden history. You see, curiosity is dangerous here. Each story, each revelation is a key. And once you hear it, there is no turning back. If you feel the chill already creeping across your spine, the first step of your initiation is simple. Like this video and subscribe. Join me, and together we'll navigate secrets that the world pretends never existed. Only those willing to see the truth will survive this journey. The Ottoman sultans were masters of psychological terror, crafting punishments so exquisite in their cruelty that they blurred the line between reality and nightmare. Concubines, girls and young women whose lives had begun in silk, perfume and whispered promises, were discarded not quietly, but in a ritualized torment designed to strip every shred of identity, every last vestige of hope. Some were locked away in rooms where the sun never reached, left to hear the laughter of their replacements above while their bodies and minds were systematically erased. Others were tested for obedience in ways that would make the bravest flinch. And yet, what awaits those who think they understand is worse. The palace itself was alive with cruelty, walls that whispered, floors that betrayed, doors that locked with the weight of inevitability. Each step was a question. How much of yourself are you willing to surrender before the Sultan decides your fate? Tonight, you will follow these forgotten stories. You will witness the unraveling of innocence in chambers the world refused to record. And if you survive, you will never look at power, beauty, or obedience the same way again. The doors of the palace are heavy, ancient, and unyielding. Once closed behind you, the sound of the outside world disappears entirely. No whispers of servants, no clatter of guards, only the suffocating silence that presses against your skin, heavier than chains. This is the first lesson. In the Ottoman palace, freedom was an illusion, and the very walls could become your captor. You are led through corridors dimly lit by flickering oil lamps, their shadows moving like predators. Every step is measured, deliberate, designed to remind you, someone always watches. And then the first chamber appears. Not a dungeon, not a cell, but a room meticulously arranged to deceive. Plush cushions, fragrant incense, delicate fabrics. Comfort. Safety. A trap. Here, concubines were first tested. The Sultan's servants would observe their reactions, watching how they handled hope, fear, and betrayal. A gentle touch, a smile, a word of kindness, it could mean nothing or it could mean the difference between a temporary reprieve and endless torment. They called it preparation, but the truth is darker. This room was a psychological cage, a place where the mind began to fracture long before the body was touched. Some concubines whispered prayers, their voices trembling like fragile glass. Others remained silent, eyes wide, scanning for a way out that didn't exist. And always, there were the sounds of the palace itself. Distant laughter, the soft clinking of chains far below, the faint cry of those already broken. Every noise was a reminder of what awaited if they failed to comply. A sultan did not discard a favorite lightly. Once chosen, once loved for beauty or charm, the concubine became a living symbol of power, power to elevate and power to destroy. The most horrifying aspect was not the instruments of torture, they were plentiful, but the ingenuity of the mind. Guards carried no weapons at first, only observation. Their knives were held, not to strike, but to see if courage or panic ruled your instincts. Every reaction was catalogued. Every hesitation remembered. And as the hours passed, the room itself seems to close in. Light dims. Walls appear nearer. The scent of incense becomes suffocating, masking something fouler beneath. The lingering essence of those who failed, whose despair still stains the cushions and carpets. You begin to understand. The palace doesn't just imprison bodies, it engineers despair. It programs fear into the very soul of its victims. By the time the door swings open again, concubines emerge forever altered. Their steps are hesitant. Their smiles when they dare are fragile. Each has tasted the first whisper of the Sultan's cruelty, and none will ever escape its echo. The next chamber is different. There is no warmth here, no illusion of comfort. Only silence, thick and oppressive, broken occasionally by the creak of the palace above or the soft shuffle of guards outside. This is the cage, the place where discarded concubines were sent when the Sultan decided they had outlived their usefulness. It looks deceptively ordinary, a small room, barred windows, a single bed, but its simplicity is deliberate. Every detail was crafted to crush the mind before the body. Step inside and you can feel it immediately. The air is heavier, tainted with the residue of despair. Faint stains mark the cushions and carpets, reminders of those who clawed at life and found none. The wooden bed bears deep scratches, the evidence of desperate hands that tried in vain to reclaim some shred of control. Even the light filtering through the barred windows is measured to torment, enough to show the world outside but never enough to reach it. You can see the Sultan's gardens, the sunlit walkways where new favorites laugh and thrive. But you, the discarded, remain trapped in shadow, staring at life you are no longer allowed to touch. It is here that the mind begins to unravel. The first days are marked by waiting, a carefully orchestrated routine designed to weaken resolve. Meals arrive silently, bland, insufficient, stripped of the delicacies once used to sustain beauty and obedience. Hunger gnaws not just at the body but at the mind. Weakness makes escape impossible, but that is only the beginning. Mental fragility makes suggestion, fear, and manipulation far more effective. A concubine begins to learn quickly. To survive, obedience is mandatory. Resistance is punished, subtly at first, then with increasing cruelty. Sometimes hope is offered as a weapon. A letter appears, seemingly from the Sultan himself, promising clemency or reunion. The handwriting is flawless, the seal perfect, or almost perfect. A single flaw, a tiny imperfection reveals the truth. This is not mercy. It is psychological torture, a poison gift meant to bind the concubine's mind in anticipation of despair. This cycle of false hope and crushing disappointment was perfected over decades, each iteration more cruel, more precise. And those who resist? For them the palace has no mercy. Sections of the floor give way, dropping victims into hidden chambers below. Others see family brought near, only to be separated by walls or bars, their suffering amplified by the agony of helplessness. The Sultan's architects of torment understood one principle: the mind is far more fragile than the flesh, and breaking one ensures the surrender of the other. In this cage, innocence dies quietly. And yet, the worst is not the visible pain, it is the slow erosion of identity, the realization that survival may demand surrendering the very soul that once defined you. The palace was more than a building, it was a machine designed to shape, manipulate, and destroy. The discarded concubines were not simply punished, they were dismantled. Every tool, every ritual, every guard's gaze was calibrated to exact terror, obedience, and despair. Nothing here was left to chance. The first instrument of cruelty was the body itself. Not all punishment required blades. Starvation, sleep deprivation, isolation. These were enough to render the most resilient fragile. Yet the Sultan's engineers of fear understood that true control came from psychological domination. Every day, concubines were reminded of their expendability. Guards would enter silently, observing reactions to false threats. A hand raised too quickly, a shiver too pronounced, and log them for the Sultan's amusement. Some were led through corridors lined with plaques depicting the punishments of those who had failed, visual warnings etched into the walls like grim hieroglyphics of despair. Then there were the manipulations of hope and despair. Letters arrived, often sealed with the Sultan's emblem. They spoke of forgiveness, reunion, or favor. But the smallest imperfection, a smudge of ink, a flaw in the wax seal, was enough to reveal the lie. Hope became a weapon sharper than any blade. The mind, starved of certainty, would cling desperately to these illusions, only to be shattered again. This cycle repeated, day after day, until the concubine's perception of reality itself began to warp. Physical pain accompanied psychological torment. Hidden chambers below the palace awaited those who resisted or failed. Floors would collapse beneath them, depositing victims into suffocating pits, where the cries of others merged into a chorus of hopelessness. The Sultan's architects of control experimented with sensory deprivation, light manipulation, and the strategic presence, or absence, of food and water, each variable calculated to accelerate obedience. Even family could be weaponized. Parents or siblings brought to the palace under false pretenses would be made to witness the concubines suffering from afar, powerless to intervene. This simple act crushed spirits faster than blades ever could. A single glance at a loved one, separated by bars, often caused resignation, acceptance that survival demanded submission. By the end of the first week, concubines no longer walked, they shuffled. Their eyes no longer sought escape, they sought only permission to breathe, to exist, to survive. The palace did not just punish, it erased identity, replaced it with a puppet of fear and obedience. And the Sultan watched, smiling from a distance, the architect of an empire built as much on terror as on conquest. By the time a concubine spent days, or sometimes weeks, in the cage, something profound had changed. The palace was no longer a place of life or choice, it had become a crucible of surrender. Every glance at the sunlit gardens beyond the barred windows, every sound of laughter drifting from the Sultan's chambers, hammered home the ultimate truth: beauty and favor were meaningless without obedience. The first irreversible transformations were subtle, almost invisible at first. Fingers would tremble when handed a meal. Voices, once melodic and soft, would falter into stammering whispers. The mind, starved of certainty and nurtured only with fear, began to accept the unimaginable. The concubine realized that resistance was not only futile, it was impossible. To survive, one must bend. To bend was to betray oneself. And yet, this betrayal was the only path to continued existence. Guards were silent teachers of obedience. They spoke rarely, but their presence alone was enough to shape behavior. A glance, a shift of weight, a hand hovering near a concealed blade, these were the cues that dictated life or dissent. Every movement was scrutinized. Every hesitation punished, sometimes subtly, sometimes brutally. The palace had perfected a language of terror, and the concubines learned fluently, even before words were spoken. Physical punishments escalated for those who faltered. Not all pain left visible marks. Some concubines were confined to chairs that forced them to maintain impossible postures for hours. Others were submerged briefly in cold water, until the line between panic and obedience blurred. But the true horror lay in the integration of mind and body. The concubine who feared, who anticipated, who doubted, would survive only if they surrendered entirely, relinquishing identity to the palace and, by extension, to the Sultan. The psychological manipulation deepened as routines warped reality. Meals arrived at unpredictable times, sometimes poisoned with subtle toxins that induced hallucinations. Dreams became nightmares, and waking life was indistinguishable from terror. Guards would casually walk by, observing reactions to these manipulations, cataloging which minds were pliable, which hearts stubborn. By this point, a concubine was no longer simply a girl who had been chosen. They had become a living testament to the Sultan's absolute dominion. Their body and spirit were no longer their own. They were instruments of the palace, performers in a macabre theater, their every action a note in a composition of fear and submission that the Sultan conducted with ruthless precision. In the Ottoman palace, cruelty was not chaotic. It was ritualized. Every punishment, every test of obedience, followed a pattern refined over centuries. The discarded concubines were not merely victims. They were participants in a deliberate theater of terror, designed to strip away not just flesh, but the very essence of self. Each day began with subtle signals. Guards would enter at precise moments, sometimes standing silently, sometimes speaking in riddles or giving impossible instructions. A concubine never knew what was real, what was a trick, or what awaited them next. Even anticipation became a tool of torment. The Sultan understood that the mind hungered for certainty. Deprive it of that, and terror takes root deeper than any blade ever could. Meals, when they arrived, were part of this design. Simple rice or bread was accompanied by messages of hope, whispered promises that favor might return, only to be cruelly rescinded. Every bite, every swallow became a choice: obey and survive, resist and suffer. The palace conditioned its victims to live in a perpetual state of anxiety, a blend of hope and despair that fractured reason itself. Punishments escalated methodically. Some concubines were exposed to mock ceremonies, elaborate displays where they watched new favorites ascend to power while knowing that their own bodies and minds were now property, not of the empire but of the Sultan's will. Others were confined to rooms designed to distort perception. Floors angled slightly, mirrors placed to magnify their own terror, the faintest sounds from distant chambers amplified into the illusion of approaching doom. The psychological manipulation was perfected in tandem with the physical. A concubine might be summoned, only to find the guard's knife held lightly to their throat, not to harm but to gauge compliance. Each reaction was noted, catalogued, remembered. This created a subtle but relentless pressure. Surrender before the knife, before hunger, before isolation, before the unseen gaze of power itself. And there were whispers of more extreme rituals. Some rooms contained faint symbols, etched into walls and floors, marking stages of obedience and failure. The Sultan's most skilled torturers believed that fear was an art form. Each concubine was a blank canvas, and their terror a masterpiece, painted over weeks and months of controlled suffering. By the end of the first month, the discarded were no longer girls or women. They were instruments honed to the precise cadence of fear, anticipation, and hopelessness. The palace did not just punish, it transformed, reshaped, and claimed them, until obedience was no longer a choice. It was instinct. By now, the concubines are no longer simply prisoners. They have entered a threshold where every step, every breath, is a measure of survival. The palace has taught them that hope is a weapon, despair is a companion, and the Sultan's gaze, real or imagined, can reshape the mind with surgical precision. At this midpoint, the rituals become explicit. Guards would summon a concubine to a small, isolated chamber where the only furniture was a chair bolted to the floor. They would sit, instructed to remain motionless for hours, listening to the distant laughter of the Sultan's favorites. Sometimes a letter arrived, sealed with a mark almost identical to the Sultan's own, telling of mercy, reunion, or favor. Every detail was calculated to elevate hope, only to crush it moments later. The palace had learned over centuries that the mind, more than the body, was the key to absolute control. Concubines began to whisper apologies to the walls, to themselves, and sometimes to shadows that had no shape. Obedience became instinct, fear became habit, and identity blurred into compliance. The discarded were no longer individuals, they were echoes of a system designed to break them, piece by piece. And now, for those who have followed this forbidden path with me, there is a small ritual you must perform if you wish to fully witness what comes next. Comment below the word shadow twice like a chant, a lock upon your own initiation. This is not mere participation, it is acknowledgement. By repeating it, you claim your place among those who see what others fear to acknowledge. Let this simple act be the first step of your transformation, a key to understanding the depths we are about to uncover together. For those who do this, the journey deepens. For those who hesitate, the stories will haunt in fragments, whispers of truths too heavy to grasp. But if you commit, if you participate in this ritual of awareness, you are now bound to the narrative. You will see the palace not as walls of stone and silk, but as a living, breathing entity of control, terror, and obsession. Soon you will witness the methods that reduced laughter to trembling silence, beauty to obedience, and innocence to a calculated shadow of itself. The discarded concubines were lessons, written in flesh, in fear, in silence, and the next steps will reveal the extent to which the Sultan mastered cruelty as an art form. Beneath the palace, beyond the gaze of even the most trusted guards, lie chambers designed for one purpose: complete subjugation. The discarded concubines were led here only after they had begun to fracture, after hope had been stretched thin, and fear had taken root. The descent itself was symbolic: a trapdoor, a narrow staircase lined with a faint stench of decay, leading to rooms where the walls seemed to close in with every step. These chambers were engineered to destroy both body and mind. Carpets were thick, muffling every footstep, every whispered plea. Floors concealed hidden pits, ready to swallow those who faltered. The walls bore faint symbols, etched codes representing past transgressions and punishments, silent records of suffering, a warning of what awaited any who resisted. Here, the concubines' every reaction was observed, catalogued, and measured against an invisible standard dictated by the Sultan. Physical punishment was deliberate, precise, and often invisible. Some concubines were confined in seats that forced unnatural postures for hours, the pain creeping slowly like ink staining the mind. Others experienced sensory manipulation, darkness to warp perception, sudden flashes of light to disorient, or faint, controlled sounds that turned imagination into terror. The Sultan's torturers understood that fear is most effective when the victim's mind cannot distinguish reality from anticipation. And then there were the tools of psychological torment. Guards would use gestures, knives held lightly, a shadow passing over the threshold, each action a subtle cue, a test of compliance. Meals arrived inconsistently, forcing hunger into the mind as an unrelenting reminder of dependency. Letters, real or false, were delivered with meticulous attention to detail, introducing hope only to crush it again. The palace had learned that a broken mind yielded obedience faster than a broken body ever could. Family, too, could be weaponized. Parents, siblings, even childhood companions were brought under pretense, only to witness helplessly from behind bars the slow unraveling of the concubine they once knew. This manufactured guilt accelerated submission, ensuring that the discarded internalized responsibility for their suffering. By the time a concubine emerged from the hidden chambers, She was no longer recognizable as the person who had once entered the palace. Her body, though intact, bore the weight of learned obedience. Her mind, though unscarred outwardly, had been reshaped into submission. And yet, this was only the beginning. The Sultan's most extreme manipulations awaited those who lingered too long in his shadow, for ultimate control was not achieved through fear alone, but through the orchestration of complete psychological surrender. The palace was not merely a home, it was a stage. And every discarded concubine was both actor and audience in a theater designed to enforce obedience and elevate terror. Here, cruelty was performance, and the Sultan the director of a play where survival and suffering were inseparable. One of the most sinister methods was replacement. A favored concubine, once adored for beauty or charm, could be discarded at any moment. New favorites arrived in silk and perfume, paraded through chambers where discarded ones were trapped. The palace ensured the discarded witnessed every step, the laughter, the whispered attentions, the intimate care. Observing joy while knowing you could never reclaim it was not incidental, it was ritual. It taught that beauty was transient, love was conditional, and power could vanish in an instant. Some concubines were pitted against one another. Obedience became a contest, subtle or overt. Who would falter under the Sultan's gaze? Who would bend first to the fear of punishment? Rivalry was orchestrated, friendships weaponized, and trust made dangerous. The palace fed on jealousy, fear, and desperation, turning human connections into instruments of control. Those who resisted not only suffered alone, they endangered those around them, reinforcing the lesson that submission was the only path to survival. Physical punishments continued alongside psychological warfare. Chambers with hidden traps, sudden drops, and sensory manipulation tested reactions. The faintest misstep could mean falling into a pit, a room of darkness, or a calculated encounter with another discarded concubine forced into obedience. Each element of the palace's design reinforced one message: resistance was pointless. Every act, every breath, every heartbeat belonged to the Sultan. Letters, carefully forged or real, maintained hope only to destroy it. A note promising reprieve might arrive one day, followed by a day of isolation, hunger, and whispered threats. The mind, stretched between expectation and despair, broke gradually. By the end of such cycles, concubines were no longer able to distinguish between safety and danger, reality and illusion. Fear became instinct, submission identity. And yet, some survived, not whole but transformed. They became shadows of obedience, teaching others through example. The palace did not simply discard concubines, it produced instruments of control, demonstrating the Sultan's mastery over both body and mind. Here, cruelty was art, and terror, a language that only the initiated could comprehend. By now, the discarded concubines are shadows of their former selves. Their bodies are fragile, their minds fractured, and their hope all but extinguished. The palace has completed its work. They are obedient, pliable, and entirely shaped by fear. Yet the Sultan is not finished. The final act is the most precise, the most horrifying, for it transforms obedience into complete subjugation, or extinguishes life entirely. The final punishment is individualized, tailored to each concubine's reactions, resilience, and perceived utility. Some are confined in chambers designed to isolate, where silence becomes a living entity pressing on the skull, and the faintest sound from beyond, the clatter of footsteps, a distant laugh, magnifies despair. Others are subjected to sensory disorientation. Floors slightly slanted, light dimmed or flickering, sounds manipulated to create the illusion of unseen movements. Every detail tests not the body but the mind, which is far more delicate and far more telling. In extreme cases, concubines are confronted with the ultimate betrayal. Family or friends brought to the palace under pretense, only to witness from behind barriers the total collapse of the concubine's composure. Guilt, helplessness, and desperation combine into a psychological weapon stronger than any physical torture. Some falter, some break entirely, a few survive, reshaped into vessels of total obedience. The Sultan's hand is never heavy, but his influence is absolute. Those who fail are removed quietly, their bodies disposed of in secret, their names erased from memory, leaving only whispered records in ambassadorial accounts or cryptic palace notes. Those who survive are marked forever, living instruments of fear, trained to reflect the Sultan's omnipotence and to warn newcomers of the consequences of defiance. Even the most minor acts of rebellion are not forgotten. Guards record every reaction, every hesitation, and use them to tailor subsequent punishments or lessons. The palace has learned that cruelty is most effective when combined with unpredictability and psychological pressure. Obedience is drilled into the mind so thoroughly that once released, a concubine cannot escape the mental chains imposed upon them. And yet, for all this terror, there is a perverse artistry. The palace transforms suffering into ritual, chaos into method, and fear into a language that only the initiated can fully comprehend. In these final chambers, the Sultan's absolute power is undeniable. Life and death, pleasure and pain, hope and despair, each exists at his whim, and each is a testament to centuries of meticulously perfected cruelty. Even after the doors of the palace finally release them, if they are ever released, the discarded concubines carry their prison within them. Freedom, in the ordinary sense, no longer exists. The mind, reshaped by months or years of meticulously orchestrated fear, obedience, and despair, retains the palace long after the body has escaped. Every shadow, every whisper of authority, recalls the hours spent under the Sultan's gaze. Some concubines attempted to rebuild lives outside the palace walls, but the trauma was relentless. Nightmares came unbidden, replaying the corridors, the barred windows, the shadows that had observed their every tremble. Trust became impossible. Relationships faltered. Even laughter, the simplest human expression, could trigger a memory of a new favorite being paraded, while they sat trapped, powerless and fading. The mind had been conditioned to anticipate cruelty. Survival instincts remained locked to fear. Historical accounts hint at these lingering effects. Venetian diplomats and foreign observers recorded the faint traces of life left in those who survived the palace's horrors. Their beauty remained, but it was haunted, their grace tinged with the rigidity of fear. They spoke rarely of what had occurred, for to speak was to summon the ghosts of the palace corridors, to summon the echo of the Sultan's authority still clinging to their soul. Silence became a shield. Yet the palace itself continued its work. Each discarded concubine served as a warning to those who remained. The price of disfavor was not merely loss, but complete annihilation of identity. In their absence, the palace's methods endured, refined, and passed on, creating a cycle of terror that persisted for generations. Their lives, erased in history, became tools for sustaining an empire built as much on fear as on power. And so the legacy of the discarded concubines is twofold. On one hand, it is a testament to the depths of human cruelty when power is absolute, a chronicle of meticulously engineered suffering. On the other, it is a warning. Even in survival, the palace claimed more than life. It claimed autonomy, identity, and the fragile sense of self. Once touched by the shadow of the Sultan, a concubine could never truly return. These are the truths that the world has tried to bury. And now, you who have witnessed them are bound to carry them forward, as silent witnesses to horrors erased from memory but never from consequence. Even as the palace fades behind them, the discarded concubines carry a presence that can never be removed. It is not the walls, nor the guards, nor the ceilings that haunt, it is the shadow of the Sultan, a lingering echo of control, fear, and absolute dominion. The corridors they once walked remain alive in memory, each step, each whisper, each subtle gesture etched into the mind like a scar that refuses to fade. The horror of the palace does not end with death or departure. Those who survived remained vessels of the Sultan's authority, walking reminders of obedience learned under terror. Their laughter muted, their glances wary, their every movement shaped by the memory of chambers, cages, and carefully orchestrated despair. The palace had claimed more than life. It had rewritten the rules of existence itself, showing that power is most absolute when it is internalized, when fear becomes instinct. And now, the truth you have witnessed, its weight pressed against your own mind, is not easily dismissed. You have walked these halls through imagination, observed the precision of cruelty, felt the erasure of identity, and sensed the cold artistry of control. Remember this: knowledge carries responsibility. Some truths are too heavy for casual thought. But having seen what few dare to confront, you are forever changed. If you have followed this journey to its end, you are now part of the secret few who bear witness. To acknowledge your passage, to seal your initiation, comment below the word shadow twice, and share this story with someone who is ready to face what most fear. Subscribe to continue walking the hidden corridors of history, where silence conceals the atrocities the world wishes to forget. This is not merely a video, it is a record, a key, a warning. And as you close your eyes tonight, know this: the palace endures. Its echoes ripple through time. Those who were discarded are not gone. They exist in memory, in the shadows of power, in the unspoken truths of history. You have glimpsed what many cannot. You are now the keeper of a story the world tried to bury. And that knowledge, once received, can never be unlearned. History is silent, but you are listening.